Hold on,
Hey,
hold on.
no, okay. No, no, go.
Okay, we've started the recording. This is the WWALS webinar. We have Vickie Everitte here. She is a professor instructor, a history instructor at VSU. She has an MA in history at VSU and an ME from the University of Alaska. Today, she's got a lifelong interest in the history of our region, cultural and natural heritage. She's going to do a short presentation for us today. If you will please hold your questions till the end. She should speak about 45 minutes, and then we'll have a Q&A for about 15 after that. Thank you.
Thank you, Janet, and thank you all for having me. I can't see your faces right now, so if you do have something, I do want you to either chat or do interrupt me. That is okay with me. But the WWALS, this organization is important. Um, WWALS has the responsibility of being good stewards of our waterways, keeping them clean, helping others experience their beauty. And these waterways also played an important part in what happened as the region developed. As settlers, U.S. settlers came into the region. I don't know, do you recognize this photograph that is up right now? Does it look a little bit familiar to you? This is Lowndes County. This is a scene along the Withlacoochee River. And so when you're floating the Withlacoochee or the Little River, or if you're on the Swanee, or maybe heading out into the Okefenokee Swamp, and you can't hear or see 2025, I want you to maybe imagine some of the events that happened in the early 1800s. Now, this is the Withlacoochee River at Langdale Landing. And besides that little bitty car that you can see in the far left side of your screen, this could have been in the 1800s. So I'm going to back up a little bit and offer some background. I was working on a project not that many years ago where I was combing through the Georgia archives. I was looking for anything that had to do with Lowndes County in the early 1800s, and I came across some letters. There were several letters written by locals who were from Lowndes County and some from Thomas and Ware County, but mostly Lowndes, to the governors, either militia or settlers. And the theme that I kept seeing or it kept surfacing was how the waterways, the creeks or rivers or swamps, were used by Native Americans during a very turbulent time. Now, I want you to use your imagination. Most of you have been at the Langdale Landing right here, the Langdale Park. I want you to transport yourself to the 1820s. Now, just a few years earlier, and this is a pretty basic map right here, but just a few years earlier in 1814, all of this land was claimed by the U.S. with the Treaty of Fort Jackson. South of the Oconee River to Florida, and this was still Spanish Florida at the time. Florida didn't become part of the U.S. until 1821. So think about 1820. This area was surveyed. It was divided up into three large counties, and the middle county was Irwin, so what Lowndes County was carved out of. That county was surveyed and carved into 490-acre lots. Now that sounds like a lot of land, but really it was not. In the middle part of Georgia, those land grants were much, much bigger. The goal was to have smaller land grants so there would be more farmers, more settlers move into the area. That had a dual purpose. One was to create a large militia. If you were an owner of a land lot, if you were male, if you were between a certain age, and that age changed through the years, but at one time it was as young as 15 and as old as 60, you were automatically in the militia. So that significantly boosts the population in the southern part of Georgia. Now, this is an 1899 map, so much, much later, but this gives you a little bit of color on the land that was garnered from the Treaty of Fort Jackson. There are the 3 counties. Now, this is an 1823 map. It's missing a few rivers and creeks. This area was newly surveyed, like what I just said. The Okefenokee wasn't really explored all that much. There was surveying that was attempted, and it wasn't very successful. But this area, Lowndes is right down at the bottom of Irwin County, right here, and came about in, let's see, 1825 was Lowndes County was established. And Thomas County was its sister county. Those 2 counties are on the same charter, and they're both celebrating their birthdays. So, as you can imagine, this was not very settled territory. There were also Native Americans living in the area who were not so enthusiastic about this land becoming part of the U.S. Now, before 1820, removal was voluntary, and I'm going to say that with, voluntary. After 1820, it became mandatory. So, mandatory removal for Native Americans meant that the U.S. set up several collection sites. So, go back to your 8th grade Georgia history or your 11th grade U.S. history, and you recall maybe the Trail of Tears. The collection site that is closest to Lowndes County was over in Alabama at Fort Mitchell, at a town called Eufaula now. So once settlers came into this area, Native Americans were gathered and taken to Fort Mitchell. As you can imagine, not everyone wanted to go. And I've got some notes. I want to make sure I don't forget a few things. Not everyone wanted to go. So there's letters that record settlers, including the militia, and regular army as well, recording Native American families moving from the west side of Georgia, moving east to Florida and into the Okefenokee Swamp. And there was an article in the Valdosta Times where a man named, and I'm not sure if you pronounce his name Prescott or Prescott, but his name was Jesse Prescott, and he was interviewed as an elderly man who had moved to the area with his family as a little boy in 1825, and so he told the paper what he remembered, and he said when they got there, there were no churches, there were no schools, there was pretty much not anything going on. Their family moved to an area near the Appala. Now, please help me pronounce this word. Appalachia River, which is a tributary to the Arapahoe River, about 5 miles east of Lake Park. And Prescott remembered hearing the sounds of wolves, bears, panthers, and he remembers a town called Old Meco Ferry. Now, Old Meco Ferry was down in Hamilton County, about 12 miles from his house. And they went there to visit. And there were about 300 or so Indian families living in that town. And he remembers their houses. He remembers the ponies, the farmland, the crops. He remembers the potatoes, corn, and goobers being grown. He remembers the warriors, the men coming up closer to where their house was off the river and doing hunting. Hunted for venison, turkey, duck, and they would collect wild honey. Now, as a boy, he doesn't remember much violence before 1830. Now, I'm sure there was some violence, but he just didn't remember any. But he said about 1835 that all changed. And that's the time of the forced removal. Here's a little bit of a closer picture of the lower counties once they became divided from the larger county. And you can see Lowndes County right there. And the borders changed quite a bit. There's another picture. And you see more and more of the rivers and creeks are documented. This one's an 1831 map. This one's over at the Georgia Archives. All right, here's a picture. This is in Lowndes County. Now, most of the pictures I've got here, the photographs, are either Lowndes County or Ware County. But these letters that I came across over the Georgia Archives, they documented the Native people moving across, but they also documented a lot of conflict and fighting. And most of those conflict and fighting took place along rivers and the swampy areas. Those were good places to hide. For instance, there was a conflict that was told by Thomas Blackshear. You probably heard that name before. He wrote a letter to the governor in July of 1836, and he said that Native men, women, and children were making their way to Florida through the swampy areas of southern Georgia. Blackshear believed that they were using the terrain to disguise their tracks. Now, they were not on boats, but they were using the areas on the side of the rivers and creeks to disguise their tracks. They were walking. There was one battle at the Big Warrior Creek in Little River. It's documented that 22 natives died. 18 women and children were taken prisoner. And when they were taken prisoner in that area, the largest jail was in Thomasville. So they were taken to Thomasville and then taken over to Fort Mitchell from there for the different groups that were taken, or they walked or boated over to Oklahoma. Curious enough, I have found no records of the people who were held in jail in Thomasville. Thomasville has one of the few courthouses and records that have never burnt. They have fantastic records on their criminal cases, who were in the jails, but the Native people, that is absent. So I don't know if they didn't keep a record or if the record just hasn't been found. That same month, there was another battle over the Chickasawachi Swamp. Blackshear wrote that the militia natives fought. Now, that's not in Lowndes County, but it's not too terribly far away. But the natives used the island inside that swamp, and that's the second largest swamp in Georgia after the Okefenokee. They used the watery terrain as their stronghold and as their defense. In November of that same year, Major Dearborn reported from Lowndes County that settlers saw Native people with packs. They were traveling through the area, mostly staying hidden and not engaging with settlers. Now, this was an Army officer, not the local militia, but he told the governor in this letter that he didn't believe that the Indians intended to attack, but to escape all observation and elude pursuit and perhaps secret themselves in the swamps. Another letter that Dearborn wrote described the environment as being extensive swampy areas, marsh, small ponds, and almost entirely unknown to anyone but the Indians. Now, the name of most of the native people who were passing through were called creeks. We don't know if they were exclusively creeks, but the majority were probably from the lower creek groups. Now, creek is a name that was given to the native people by the British because they were mostly found by the creeks. You also hear the word Muskogee. Well, that's the language. the official or the do business as name for the nation is Muskogee, and then Creek in parentheses, and then nation. To be more accurate, you would be called by your town. Two of the letters did mention a town, the Uchi. But that would be the same as us or settlers back then being called either English because that's what they spoke, or by their town, a Franklinville person, a Valdosta, much, much later when Valdosta was established. So the name differs. But creek is because of they were usually by the creeks. Now, as you know, Lowndes County was established in 1825. So those land lotteries that were set up in 1820, they were decided by drawings that were held between September 1st and December 2nd of 1820. That's how they got all of the people. My family came into the area with the initial land lotteries from Connecticut. Let me go back to another. There was another militia guy named Mark Wilcox. He was Georgia militia. He wrote to the governor that the region was riddled with trails, all leading to Florida from the western sections of Georgia. He described the areas thick with vegetation, swampy waterways, and dotted with hammocks. And I know that you know what a hammock is. Sometimes with the younger students, you have to describe or define what that word means. But a hammock is a densely wooded area of ground that rises above the swampy areas. Now, the settlers, they needed to organize, or they felt they needed to organize against these people who were moving through, their territory. And so in Lowndes County, they established what was called the Committee of Safety for Lowndes County. And they were, if I were to show you the list of people on that committee, you would recognize those names as being founding members of the area. But the commander of the local militia, which was oversaw by the Committee of Safety, was commanded by a man. His last name was Knight, Knight. And he kept the governor updated on everything. He wrote loads of letters about what was going on. And while from Lowndes County, he spent most of his time scouting the Okefenokee. So he was based in Lowndes County. And then he would take his militia on horseback, they were riflemen, over to the Okefenokee in Ware County. And he wrote about several fights. One was on the Swanee River, around or near and around where the Georgia-Florida line was. And the fighting was both on the Georgia side and the Florida side. And the groups that they were following, the native groups, they weren't small. They were estimated to be in the hundreds. Knight noted that many of the people were headed into the Okefenokee Swamp. And I think you'd probably agree that that would be a good place to hide if you needed to get away from others. Now, earlier, most of the natives were moving into Florida. When you got into about 1835, 36, and then later, even into 1840 and the early 1840s, the Second Seminole War was going on in Florida. And so that wasn't really an ideal place to go to. So the Okefenokee Swamp became a place to stay for a while, and it is quite large. Knight and his men, they would go, or they would try and get as far around the Okefenokee Swamp as they could. And like I said earlier, they were on horseback, but they had trouble. As you can imagine, as you have probably seen, the terrain is thick, it's muddy, it's swampy, and horses don't do too well in that environment. He also wanted the governor to approve forts all around the swamp. He felt that the militia needed to surround the swamps to really do a good job of flushing out the native people. Some of those forts were approved, some were not. The governor had quite a bit going on in the area. The Cherokees were also in the north and they were being forced out as well. So the militia was spread a bit thin across the state. Let me see. Oh, they also wrote about how this area was a frontier. And I know we always think about the frontier, or at least I used to, as being out west. As you know, right now I'm in Tucson and the Wild Wild West. I've always thought that that was the U.S. frontier. But the area in South Georgia was the early frontier of the old Southwest. And so I always thought that was pretty interesting. There was another confrontation in 1836 around, oh, let me back up, around the an area east of the Alapaha River. Knight recorded about 500 warriors being over in that area. And received intelligence that more were coming, and they were moving from the west side of the state, from the Chattahoochee region, moving over to the Okefenokee. In August of that same year, Henry Blair reported that parties of Native Americans were moving through, and they were mostly families. They were the men and the women and the children. And when the battles ensued, um, sometimes the women would also be casualties. What I found is that a lot of times the militia could not distinguish between the males fighting and the females fighting because they were dressed the same. And if you would imagine, you were moving across an area, a hostile area, and so you fought side by side. Now, I have not found a record of any of the men being taken prisoner. So every conflict, the men all died. If anyone was taken prisoner, it was the females and the children. Colonel Blair, in August of that same year, also received word that Indians were in the northern areas of Lowndes County near the Ware County line along the side of Cow Creek. Now, in our region, there are two markers from the Georgia Historical Society, and one is at Cow Creek at a large cypress swamp. The marker text is limited, but there was a group of about 65 to 70 Native Americans fighting. The militia had about 80 to 20 men, so they had to stop and call for help. This battle took place over several hours, and there was even a storm that was recorded. There was a hurricane that happened about that time, and the scene was described as lasting a few hours and being very chaotic. There were at least two militiamen who died. There were Native Americans who died. There were several women who were taken as prisoner, and there was also a militiaman who recorded natives taking their casualties back into the swamp. There was also a horse that died. There was another skirmish at Brushy Creek, and Blair's men found about 2 to 3 wounded men who were camping near the Withlacoochee River. I think it was from about an earlier battle. In October, so fall of 1836, Thomas Hilliard reported a violent exchange on the Swanee River near the mouth of the, make sure I pronounce this correctly, it's the mouth of the Swanee Hoochie Creek, which is a tributary of the Swanee River, located west of the Okefenokee Swamp and not too far from the Georgia-Florida line. The militia was convinced that the natives had moved into the Okefenokee and they had made camp there, waiting out the Seminole War where they could, leave and go south. And they were mostly on that large island that is within the interior of the Okefenokee. But there are countless letters that are in the Georgia archives right now that describe how the people were moving through the area that we call home now. And so, when you're floating these rivers, when you go over to Langdale Park and you get in your kayak and you start floating, there's so many places where you cannot see houses or roads or you can't hear. So you can imagine what may have taken place here in the 1830s and 1840s. So, I ask you just to pause and think about how these sandy and often muddy shores offered a safe places for native families who were moving away from removal. And this can be, a little sad, but I also believe, and I don't want to get all mushy on you, but it can also be inspirational because these actions show determination. Many of these families were successful in moving away to the swamp and then later south into Florida, away from the U.S. settlements. And also, when you're floating these spaces, there were quite a few deaths. And so we don't know where all people were buried along these waterways and in these swamps, particularly the Okefenokee, but all through, what was Irwin County, what is Lowndes County now, Thomas, and also Ware County, and into the swamp. So that is, I spoke much, much quicker than probably I should have, so it's only been 30 minutes. So that is my presentation. I have a few more pictures I want to share with you, but these are Lowndes County. This is floating the Withlacoochee, and I know y'all have seen these before. Some of the latter ones are the Okefenokee. Oh, I had to throw in another map. This map shows a few more of the waterways, and it also shows Miko Town. If you see down in the bottom, you see the Arapahoe River and then Miko Town. This is in Lowndes County. This is the Okefenokee. There's a book by Megan Kate Nelson, and they sell it at the visitor center at the swamp. That book is the landscape. That book is it's called Trembling Earth. That book, it's good. It's a book that she wrote from her PhD work. Her dissertation does go in a lot more detail. And this is also the Withlacoochee River. And so that's everything. Um, so yeah, that was a little bit quick, but I want to know what you think and I want to know your ideas. And I do have another thing that I want to do when I'm in Georgia next. I've got all these skirmishes that I know roughly about where they happen, but I haven't gone to the places to take pictures. I mean, Cow Creek, those are documented, but there's quite a few others that we don't have pictures to connect with the pictures. I mean, with the letters, and that's going to be another project down the road. So, so Janet, that is the presentation.
Fanny has a question in the chat.
Oh, that's a good question. Okay, that is next. What I've been working on, or what I'm working on right now, is trying to get all of the names of the people who went through Fort Mitchell in 1836, 1837, 1838. I'm trying to narrow it down to those dates. I'm working with a group that was out of Fort Mitchell. I'm also reaching out to the Muskogee Creek Nation to figure out who those people are. I have hit a dead end with the records in Thomasville, so I'm hoping there'll be maybe some oral histories of families, descendants of families in Oklahoma that can help. There was a Miss Addie George who used to live in Georgia. She was from the Muskogee Creek Nation. She's passed now. She was over at the Ocmulgee National Mounds for a long time. She was also an advisor on the monument that is at Fort Mitchell, the Sacred Fire Monument. So I'm hoping that she may have recorded some families who did make it through. It would have been women and children. Um, so real curious about that. That's for down the road. A couple of sidebar on this. This is all connected to what was going on just north of, or, right at the line of the Treaty of Fort Jackson, north of Irwin County with the Ocmulgee. There's an initiative for that area to become Georgia's first national park. Earlier this week on Tuesday, it's Senate Bill 1131. It was in subcommittee. So it's made it out of subcommittee. It should be in committee soon for the vote. Last year we got really close. It did make it out of the Senate. It got stuck in the House, and then died at the end of the congressional session. We're hoping that will change this year. There's more momentum, I believe. Also with the Okefenokee Swamp, the UNESCO designation announcement, if it is approved, crossing our fingers and toes, that announcement will be made in April of this year. Our area in Lowndes County and Ware County, connecting all of this, all of our streams, creeks, and swamps, all of those waterways are connected to telling the story of this space. And they're very important, I believe, so they're not forgotten. And they're also sacred spaces. So what other questions do you have? Oh, and thank you, by the way.
You mentioned another swamp, not the Okefenokee, something starting with Chick.
Chicka, it's the second largest.
Where is that?
That would be northwest of Lowndes County. Let me find. And I didn't send that map. I've got that map. I can post that map later. There is a marker there too. Oh gosh, if I say it, I'm gonna follow it
Somewhere on the
up.
other side of Albany?
Closer to Albany, yes. It's the second largest swamp watershed in the state. So Okefenokee, of course, is the largest. This one's the second.
Chicka Swamp.
Chickasawachi.
Chickasawachi.
Yeah, Chickasawachi. Chickasawhatchee.
Muskogee. What was that name again for the creeks? Don't think I've ever heard of it. Muskogee. Muskogean is the language, so Muskogee. So there's usually, well, a lot of times there's two names for Native Americans group, what the settlers called them or what the Europeans called them and what they called themselves. For instance, the Navajo is a name given to the Dene people by the Americans. They call themselves the Dene. Americans or the settlers called them Navajo. So there's usually two names going on. And there's a lot of times there's more than two names going on. Oh, I see it. Thank you.
The Muskogee are certainly aware of Lowndes County. I don't know whether there's much direct connection, but I was told recently by Lowndes County Chairman Bill Slaughter that they noticed that the county bought the land at the confluence of the Little and Withlacoochee rivers, and they wanted to discuss possibly coming to look to see what they could find of native habitation. I was told by the vice chief of the Cherokee tribe of Georgia, there probably wouldn't be any permanent buildings because it's all floodplain, but there probably would be seasonal hunt camps.
Yes, be seasonal hunting camps. There's not a strong partnership between the Muskogee Creek Nation and Lowndes County right now, but there is some relationship.
Mhm.
So right now with the bicentennial coming up, Jessica Gaines is at the courthouse is working on a presentation, and there is one slide about the Native people who were here, and Tracy Rivas of the Muskogee Creek Nation. She's reviewing the verbiage to make sure it reflects what should be written on that. There are partnerships between the nation and Macon and Columbus, and I email with Tracy, and I have told her that Lowndes County would love to get involved, however is needed. Oh, that's pretty cool. Yeah.
You may want to read it for those who aren't looking at the chat.
One thing that Tracy Rivas was talking about not too long ago was when she moved into the area, and her aunt was Addie George, who was here years ago, is pronunciation. When we look at our creeks and rivers and many of the names, you know which ones are native names. The Withlacoochee, the Willacoochee, the Alapaha, the Okefenokee. But through the decades, through all of these years, we have very much South Georgian the pronunciations, and she's been offering how to use the Muskogean pronunciation, and so I've told her I'm very much interested in that, and then what those words mean.
Speaking of pronunciations, if you flip back to the map that shows Miko Town,
The one with Franklinville.
yeah, same one.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you see where it says Alapaha River, and it shows going into it something called Irwin River. The Irwin River is what we now call the Alapahuchee River.
Lapahoochee.
They had a lot of trouble mapping these rivers.
Oh, and you looking at all these old maps, you got to just double check everything because there's mistakes. There's mistakes with where the rivers move through.
Mm-hmm. My favorite is the map that shows Waldo Station.
Waldo Station.
Yeah, it was made by somebody from somewhere in the Northeast after the war, and he mistook. It's actually was supposed to say Valdosta, but he read it as Waldo Station.
Oh, I believe that. Oh, yes. Oh, there's all kind of misspellings. There are misspellings on the same document of different places. So you'll see Troopyville all over the place. Troopyville does not have an E, it's a Troopville.
Right, because
That
Governor Troop's name did not have an E.
no, but there's all kind of mistakes like that. But that's just part of the story.
And of course, the reason Governor Troop was so popular was he was all in favor of getting rid of the Indians.
Correct. Correct. And oh, this is a whole different rabbit hole, but his first cousin on his mother's side was McIntosh, who signed, as you probably know, who signed the Treaty of Fort Jackson several times for other people. It was not a treaty that most of the Creek Confederacy agreed on.
You're
And
talking
he
about
paid
my
for
great, 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 great uncle now.
it. Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, he was sentenced to treason.
Mm-hmm.
The penalty was execution from his town. He did not go willingly, and when you read the details of that execution, it was pretty brutal.
Yeah, they were not in favor of what he did.
No, he didn't, and he received what today would be considered bribes. Looked at a little bit differently then. So, but he was very well to do in the area.
Mhm. You and Fanny may want to talk. Fanny Jackson Gibbs, who's on here, you read a couple of her questions there. She's done a lot of research on history in this area, particularly African American history. A lot of things that mesh with what you're talking about. And I have to say, we have a dignitary on the call. The mayor of Valdosta is here, Scott James Matheson. Perhaps we would like to have him say a few words. What do you want to say, Mayor?
I'm always smarter when I listen to Vickie talk. That's what I
Oh,
want to
you're
say.
sweet. I've been very nervous.
No, it's fascinating. I mean, fascinating. No,
Thank you.
I had talked to Donald for a while about the markers, and the more he researched, the more that corridor was very unremarkable in its history. So
Mhm.
so I said, well, then you have a blank canvas. Every quarter mile, we'll put one of those along that entire stretch once the expansion's complete, and tell whatever story we want about the history of the area and about Valdosta. So it really is a blank canvas. I'm kind of excited to put that little exclamation. It's dual sidewalks on each side of the 3-lane expansion. So, but one of them is a full 5-foot activity trail. It's a lot wider than the other one because that's a very heavily traveled pedestrian corridor.
We're talking about Barack Obama Boulevard.
Yep, I sure am.
Mhm.
And then we get good news tonight. The scope and scale of that project had to be shaved back from Hill Avenue to Northside Drive. It originally was Hill Avenue all the way to Perimeter, but the $16 million starting point became $31 million. So they had to reduce the scale. Well, Ben's figured out in next year's budget how to pay for the north side to Perimeter. So that project will actually go into construction a few months ahead of the Barack Obama widening. So we got the whole project after all, and that was big news at the work session on Tuesday.
Oh, good, good. And Mayor, regarding the Muskogee Creek Nation, Tracy Rivas, she wants to partner with all the communities. So she wants to partner with all the communities. They see this as being important to recognize the area.
Tracy's with the Muskogees, I guess.
She is. She is Uchi
Ah,
and lives
Vic,
in Macon now.
Vickie, can I task you and Jess Gaines and Donald with actually, if I told you there was going to be 25 markers, would you do 25 storyboards for those markers?
Oh, I'd love to. Love to.
Would you? We'll try and figure out what abbreviated form and fashion you're going to have to break it all up in, but I'll determine how many of those there'll be, and that project will be yours.
Okay.
maybe you'd like to include Fanny because she's already got some ideas for markers.
Hi,
Okay,
Fanny.
that'd be great. That'd be great.
What are you thinking of, Fanny?
Fanny put her information in the text, and I sent that to Vickie, so the two of them can get together on that. And Miss Vickie, if you'll send me Tracy's information.
I will.
Well, and I just wanted to chime in. Donald Davis has long been talking about having historical markers at the confluence. That's part of Helen's vision for that park, that there would be educational and historical markers. And so I think it would be awesome if the Native people could come and make a little survey to say, well, this is or that is. I mean, that would just be super exciting.
Oh, that would be. And his markers are going to tell along that path. Are going to tell everything from the flora and fauna and longleaf pine, and there'll be identifiers like that along the way too. Correct?
Exactly. Exactly. But, Helen's vision was certainly historical and natural.
Helen Tapp's another one. I always feel smarter when I sit down and get to talk to her. She was a neat lady.
Well, the environmental and the historical, it is all related. It is all related.
Yeah. I'd like, when you guys are doing that project, I'd like it to be uplifting, but if there's Trail of Tears type stories to tell, please tell them.
I think there's a way to tell the story that, I mean, there is the sad part of it.
Yeah,
There's a lot of that, but there's also stories of determination that are important. And so I think we need to tell the full story.
I do too. And I heard that in any of those forced marches, any of those, that has to be told. It says there was somebody else out there that went through what you went through. So I think it'd be wonderful.
So many possibilities.
Yeah. That's your project. The timeline's about 2.5 years.
Okay.
When we get done, I'll get it funded to get the railroad ties sunk, and then I'll get it funded to get the copper placards, and you guys will already have the storyboard. So
I forwarded you Fanny's contact information from the chat, Mayor, so you'll know how to reach her.
Thank you. I just did what I do best, though. I just delegated to Vickie and Donald and Jess.
Well, I copied Vickie as well.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vickie. This was really interesting.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for letting me do this.
Come
see you
back and do it again. And also you may want to watch, Fanny was our first webinar speaker. So if you look on the webinar page, you'll find a link there.
Okay, I'll do that.
Please invite me to all of them.
All righty then. Looking forward to meeting you with the acting city manager pretty soon there, Mayor.
Yep. We just had a meeting. Matter of fact, I got in late to this Zoom by about 5 minutes because we ran over. So he's looking forward to meeting you too.
Let me know when, where, and what time.
All right, John. Bye, Vickie. Bye, Gretchen. She already left.
Oh, there I can see people now.
Yeah.
People.
I was having technical issues.
Mhm.
Yeah.
We saw you the whole time.
That's
Oh
right.
gosh. Oh gosh. All right. Hey, thanks. Thanks for everything.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
All righty. Thanks again.